Lords of the Fallen, not to be confused with Lords of the Fallen,
They're the same picture.
is the latest Souls-like adventure that'll see you throwing your controller out the window and yelling at pixels on the screen. Today we're going to go through 5 major mistakes to avoid, plus one bonus one at the end. Let's go! Let me know any tips and tricks you have in the comments down below. So firstly, let's talk about the umbral lamp, as this is sort of like, I guess you could say it's the gimmick for Lords of the Fallen, but it is really critical for like everything you do in the game. The main purpose of it is definitely the exploration, right? So you will come across areas that you say you can't cross, or maybe there's an area you can't climb, and often you can tell if there is something in the umbral realm because there'll be some of like the moths around, and there's some, occasionally like a little bit of environmental details like markers there to tell you that maybe there's something in the umbral realm. But you can bring up your lamp and actually see if there is, and in most cases there probably is, and there might be a ladder there that you can climb that doesn't exist in the real world, or maybe there's like a bridge across a gap that also doesn't exist in the real world. So most areas that you'll come across in the game, if you want to actually explore the entire area, or in some cases even actually get to the boss, you'll need to spend time in the umbral realm. It's just as beneficial for exploration as well, and finding new areas and upgrades and that sort of a thing, as a lot of the more critical upgrades, like say upgrading your flask, that it comes from the umbral realm, is the pieces that you do need. A good general rule is that any of the hazards that you see in like the real world, let's say water or lava, things like that, they don't exist in the umbral realm. So if say there's a giant puddle of water, you'll actually be able to switch to the umbral realm and just like walk across like the waterbed at the bottom. You can also use your lamp to destroy the blue ballistas, and they'll give you a little bit of like withered health back, and then by damaging enemies you can actually replenish your health that way. It also gives you some vigor as well, but the lamp is just so critical to everything you do in the game, including in combat and including your resting points. And that brings us to number 2, which is Vestige seeds. So why Vestige seeds are important is, for the most part in Lords of the Fallen, your like resting points, like where you find those like old lamp bearers, they are pretty few and far between. When you're exploring in most of the general areas, like every time you progress into a new area, you'll actually use these Vestige seeds to create your own resting points at certain locations. So you'll always want to have at least one Vestige seed with you in case you come across these flower beds where you can actually summon a resting point, because it really sucks when you don't have any and you're like super deep in a new area and you end up dying and you've got to go all the way back and make your way through that whole area again. There's a couple of ways to get Vestige seeds. You can buy them from Molyneux at the Skyrest place in the umbral realm. You need to switch over to there and the vendor will be there and you'll be able to purchase them from him. You can also get them actually in the umbral realm. Certain enemies like the pregnancy dragonfly thingy, I don't know what these thingies are, but they often will always drop a Vestige seed, so you'll be able to get one from them. And in some cases as well, if you've found like a static spawn of them where they always spawn, you'll actually be able to go and farm them to actually just get more of the seeds, so you'll never sort of run out and you don't have to buy them when you do run out. But it's also just worth mentioning how important these are, right? Like, you will need these flower beds. Often there'll be a flower bed right near a boss arena or just in the middle of areas, and it just saves you so much time by having these. Also just allowing you to like level up or travel back to Skyrest, as you can always just travel back to the seedling that you've built, but you can only have one of these seedlings active at a time, so you just got to make sure that you're putting these down in the right spot. Next is items, and items are so powerful in this game, and I completely ignored them for a long time until I reached a certain boss, and I was like, all right, I guess I'll play around with these item things, and I was like, oh damn, these are actually pretty good. So there's a couple of things, right? So there's the salts, which will add elemental damage to your weapons. Now there are various salts for all the different sort of elemental types, from, you know, fire to poison and etc. And adding these will just add additional damage to your weapon, as well as the buildup of that element type. And it will deal additional damage plus a chunk of damage when the status buildup does fill out, same as it does on you. Enemies, including bosses, have resistances and vulnerabilities, and you can tell if they're weak to something because the damage numbers will be red, and if it is gray, then they're actually like resistant to that damage type. So if you find a salt that is actually beneficial for a boss, then you definitely want to use it on them. You've also got balms, which can increase your resistance by significant amounts to certain damage types. This is great, especially once you get to like the poison swamps when there's poison everywhere. Like poison resistance balms will definitely help you out there. And then if you do actually get triggered by that status effect, you can cure it with the cures as well. So the cures will just completely clear clear whatever of that status effect you actually currently have. And there are other items as well, right? Like you've got your ammo pouches for your range slots, you've got the Brio Stone just to give you some like heal over time, so if you just need that little bit of extra juice. But there are plenty of really good items, so pay attention to anything that you do pick up and actually use these, because they can be really critical into boss fights. Lords of the Fallen, like all of these games, have the option to reset your build, which you can do back at like the main area of Skyrest. Now, this requires an item called the Rebirth Chrysalias, which will just reset your stats, but they are very, very rare. You can only buy one from Molnu, and there is another couple of ways you can get a couple more in the game, but they are super rare, and I would not be recommending to reset your build until you're much later down the line, or you have made just an absolutely atrocious build and you really want to change it. But not only is it just expensive to do so, because you can only do it a couple of times throughout the playthrough, you'll find tons of new weapons and stuff that you might want to tinker with later down the line, and if you want to build yourself in a different way at that point, it's definitely worth doing. But in the early stages of the game, right, like weapon scaling isn't that good. Basically every weapon you come across will have D weapon scaling in whatever stat it's actually using, and by increasing your stats in, let's say, strength or agility or inferno, radiance, whatever your chosen stat may be, you're actually not gaining that much additional damage. You'll need to wait for the blacksmith. Right now you can get the blacksmith once you get to the bell room area, and it's pretty hard to miss, right? There's a boss after you sort of meet the blacksmith, and you'll hear them like banging on their hammer, and you'll just need to go and defeat the guard and then talk to them, give them the key, and they'll come back to Skyrest. You'll be able to upgrade your equipment, which is where most of your actual damage increase numbers will come from, right? Like especially until you get much further down the line and that damage scaling gets better for those specific stats. For the most part, when you are just leveling up, putting points into like vitality and endurance is definitely beneficial. I mean, the more health you have, right, the longer you survive, plus stamina, the more times you can attack and that sort of a thing. So early stages of the game, don't worry too much about the weapon you're using and actually try to get, you know, your strength and agility up. Really focus on your vitality and your endurance, and potentially like if there's a certain weapon you want to use, right, you want to meet those minimum attribute stats, so increase it to that, but don't worry about that too much until you get the blacksmith and actually start upgrading your weapons. Let's go through some combat things that I have come across. Dodging is super OP. The invincibility frames are fantastic in Lords of the Fallen. Absolutely highly recommend. Parrying attacks is the best way to like break an enemy's posture, so you can follow up with one of those heavy attacks, and you can see how much posture they actually have by the outer circle on the lock-on ring. In some cases, you might get this bar like basically all the way down and the bar will be gone. You might just need to follow up with like a kick or something just to trigger the actual effect to then follow up with that attack. It's also worth pointing out that kicks are just like super powerful. Like staggering enemies with kicks are really good. It's a great option, especially for some larger enemies. Some enemies you come across as well will be affected by like a blue parasite. Now, early in the game, this just makes them invulnerable and you'll need to bring up your lamp and destroy it. There are other ones that will heal enemies over time or even buff their damage, and certain bosses will have these as well. So just pay attention to their health bar, and if you see if it's completely blue, it means they're immune, or if they have a little blue orb next to it, it means they actually have one of these parasites that you'll need to destroy. You can also use the soul flay ability on enemies and on bosses. There are some bosses that this makes those fights so much easier. What this will do is like pull out their soul, and you can then damage that soul for a period of time. The soul will go back in, and then you can follow up that hit to just take off a huge chunk of their health. On standard enemies, this isn't very good, right? Like you may as well just kill them, but bosses and certain like heavy enemies that have a heap of health, this is a great way to chunk down most of their health, and highly recommend using. Also, don't forget that you can switch stances, right? Like I completely forgot about this until like halfway through the game. I accidentally pressed Y on my controller and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot you can change stances. And so yeah, change stances. They make the weapon attack animations different. This is really good, say if you've got a weapon that has a big cleaving like swing animation, which is great for AoE, but when you're in tight corridors, you'll keep like hitting the wall. You may want to switch to like say switching its stance, which maybe it'll have like a different say stabbing attack, which is a bit more of a frontal attack, so you won't hit the walls. And also just get used to those weapon animations, right? Like it really helps in those scenarios, because this game is filled with like tight corridors and then big open areas, and you can kind of get stuck just like smacking against the wall. It does get a little bit frustrating. Now onto our bonus mistake here. Photo mode is not only great to take photos, it's actually OP as it always is in Souls games, right? So you can use this to look around corners and see if there's going to be, you know, some cheeky dude there that's going to stab you in the face. You can also use it to look above you or below you, sort of find areas that you're looking for. And, you know, if you need to take a break, you can use it to just pause the game. I love the addition of photo modes, not only because, you know, it's great as a YouTuber, so you can take photos and all that good stuff, but also just to pause Souls-likes. Like, I don't I just don't understand why none of these games have like a legitimate pause button. It's so good to actually be able to just pause the game when I need to go and do something. It's great. So absolutely use the photo mode to take some cool photos. And lastly, go and check out our class guide that goes through all of the classes and gives you the strengths and weaknesses and different reasons to play each of them. So if you're struggling with a class to pick, or you just want more information on all the classes, go and watch that video. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.